This is Michelle Cannon, who's a researcher who is my collaborator on many of the projects and adventures that we go on in my classroom. And we're hoping to present this together and also hoping to interact with you through this. So I don't want this to be one way. I'd really like to have some discussion about what I'm presenting. And I'd particularly like it if we didn't all agree. So do a couple of people want to play devil's advocate? Just nominate themselves, even if they personally don't. Are you all right?
Always.
Just even, I mean, it doesn't matter, you don't have to represent your own view then, just maybe an opposing or different view. Does that sound all right? That sounds brilliant. And another, maybe someone else. Just know that we invite that. Because I think the underlying theme about what we're about to talk about is, for us as teachers, the value of educational research is probably really in the conversation as much as it is in the process of the outcomes. It's what the research conversation brings to us in our practice, and how it informs, structures and validates our own thinking and our own professional judgment. I don't mean that we just use research to confirm what we already think, but I do mean that we already bring a lot to the conversation as classroom teachers that shouldn't be abandoned just because someone's just released a very politically sensitive but tasty morsel of information about what might happen. So that's something that I hopefully we can also replicate in this environment. So just to introduce myself, I'm an English teacher in a London classroom, and I'm so enthusiastic about my work that I keep finding that I stumble across opportunities to collaborate with others who have got things to bring. And I'm really just going around asking people to join me in the classroom and explore the work of the classroom together. And in doing that, I've discovered this incredible vein of brilliant, helpful, useful input from people in the research world. And I thought I'd go through a number of those and the ways that it happened for me as a way of just an object model of how all classrooms could work in relationship to research. And I think that one of the keys of this is that we are in charge of our classroom. It gives us enormous power to do things our way, but also to influence how things are done by the researchers. So I'll just go through it example by example and we'll discuss each as we go. And the reason Michelle Cannon's here is because she's a researcher who I work with on one particular project, but with whom I discuss everything I do because she's thinking in a way that helps me to form my thinking. And I think it's a mutual two-way process, isn't it? So at a certain point, Michelle will also step in and speak about some of the research that she's doing in relationship to work that I'm doing. Okay, sound all right to you? Mm-hmm. Okay, start again. So the concept is it's in the classroom. So it's how research has an impact on what I'm doing in the classroom, and how research has driven what I do in the classroom, rather than just kind of circled around it. So it's probably best that I break it up as much as I can. So I broke it into 3 dimensions. And the first one is one that, of course, we're talking a lot about, is being informed by research. So I'll give you an example of how I've been informed by research, just as to add to the big picture of what everybody's doing. And that means finding research and understanding it, and then trying to apply it in practical situations. And then talking about the classroom under the microscope, so making my classroom a place where research can happen. And that's an important discussion for us as teachers, because it involves us taking a very courageous and quite I think I'd say an ambitious role in the process. And then lastly, talking about measuring our own impact and all of the problems and the minefield that is, and that some of the outside commentators don't really fully encompass in their understanding. But this is some education that we have to do to the wider research community about what impact actually is in a classroom. Because, as we know, impact is not just described by their GCSE response rate. So let's talk about that when we get to it. I think first of all, talk about research enabling innovation, and I'm literally just giving an example. Now, we know about John Hattie, we know about his meta research, where he's looked at a number of studies and he's tried to rank educational actions in terms of the impact they have. There's a lot of questions to ask about that, and even though he is a countryman of mine, I still do need to ask those questions. And one of them is impact on what? So we should keep that question in mind when we're doing all of this conversation. But just to introduce the project and to show you an example of where it went, I see research not as something that should determine what I do or constrain what I do, but it should empower me, especially to be innovative or to practice or try new things. I think I do that with research. I pick a piece of research that people have validated and I show trust in their work. And once I've seen that it's valid in some form or has recognition for being valid, then I look at how I might use that information in my classroom. And so the feedback information as an English teacher, wow, it was great to know that feedback is a useful and effective thing to do in the classroom. And I thought, well, okay, I do a bit of that. So how can I expand on that? And I thought, I know, there's more interaction going on in other domains than my classroom, and it's more efficient. And one of them is engaging with technology. So I thought, I didn't think I need to use technology because I need to be a modern man as I'm starting to pass through my years. But I thought technology could help me give better feedback. So I set up a student blogging system, which was focused on feedback. So the purpose for using technology in my classroom is not to use technology or to try and be modern. It's in order to try and enable my effectiveness giving feedback, to try and improve the feedback that my students get. So everything I did was to achieve that. And that's where the research was informing what I was doing. I knew feedback would be okay. If I stayed in that terrain, it didn't really matter how crazy the work was. As long as it was improving the feedback the students were getting on their work, it was probably going to improve their outcomes in learning. So I want to show you what came of it. I realized that I learned a lot that the researchers didn't tell me when I started doing this. I set up student blogging. I used the commenting function on blogs for feedback, and I made the blogs available to the world, and all 138 of my students had their own blogs, and we didn't have any books in the classroom, so it was all virtual, and the parents could look and anyone else could look. And let's just give you one little example. So this is what happened as a result of my allowing my practice to be guided by research in this area. A student wrote a poem. Now that happens all over the world. It's happening right now. It's just the most beautiful thing. And normally that just happens in that classroom, and if they're lucky, that it might go off on the wall somewhere. But this poem went on the internet. The student published it themselves when they were ready. It's a really nice poem. Even that first stanza, if you read it, you'll see, as fresh as the air, like a blade slicing through the wind, we glide as one, you and I, even as one lives and one dies. It's quite nice for an 11-year-old boy. He's doing good. And then what happened is, of course, I gave him my feedback. Told him he created a beautiful thing, and I quoted from his work. And it's all on his blog. But this is what then happened. And this is the feedback that no research study could either encompass or anticipate. And this is what really matters. This is what happened next. His dad logged in and made a comment and said what the teacher said, and I'm so proud of you, you know more about English than I do. And then the next thing that happened, because that was great, was an English teacher from another school came across the poem and decided to do sort of an analysis of the meter of the poem that I actually don't have the skill to do. So he got this incredibly impressive piece of analysis of his work from from another school. And then it didn't stop there, because another teacher from another school just wanted to talk about how much he loved the poem, and that carried on because Kayam, his schoolmate, wanted to make a comment as well, because he saw that there was this conversation going on. So Kayam chips in and says he likes that first stanza, and as a friend I like it. I'd never give you a criticism because it's just too good, he says, or it's just too good. And then an educational researcher made a comment on his poem, and this is to say I shared it at a talk I did for teachers. This boy, you might have been observing the dates, but the poem was written 4 days prior. 4 days later, an educational researcher was using this poem as an example in a speech to a group of teachers and people interested in teacher education. And then then Tyrese decides to check in on his poem, and he sees this enormous stream of conversation, and he just says, "Thanks, I'd love it." That's him. But he also walked around the school that day, and everybody was going, "Tyrese, I read your poem. It's awesome." And five, give me five, give me 10. But the thing is, that's the feedback, and that's the feedback that John Hattie's talking about, because I know what he's talking about. He's not talking about that every book is marked with a green pen. He's not talking about the instant feedback, and the feedback's being written, and the children are being forced to respond to that feedback. He's talking about when a person gets feedback that is genuinely a response to their work. It is a powerful tool in education. And
so I'm really sorry to interrupt. I love what you're saying. I just wondered, is there any way that a negative feedback could do the opposite thing? Say if someone came in and chipped in there with something like, "That's a load of crap, Tyrese," could that undo that? Have you found any of that?
I have found that to be the most useful feedback of all in terms of their learning, because obviously it's moderated, so the process is I managed the process. That's something that was just destructive wouldn't make it there without my moderation. And what I've done in that situation is I've not published it, I've printed it. And I've sat down with the student and I've talked about, look what happened, look what someone did. Look, isn't it interesting what happens in the world? Like, a lot of people loved that poem, but some didn't. And we're equipping the kids for the world, aren't we? We're not just talking about the poem. We're talking about, and as a teacher, I felt like I genuinely had a role that time. Does that make sense? Like I helped the 11-year-old boy to make sense of that kind of cruelty, and I love that I can do that through this, and that I'm having it provides me with opportunities that, it will be, educational researchers can't get near really, and that was stimulated by research.
Just a kind of maybe not the negative, but I think the majority of the blogging stuff, probably it's great if you get great feedback, but I think most of them you get no feedback, because you demoralize students as well.
Well, I don't find they get no feedback, but that's partly because I'm obliged to give them feedback, so they're going to get something. Like I have to mark the kids' work, and so they're going to get something from me at least. And the other stuff is serendipitous, so it might only be from me. But the other thing you can do, just while we're on the topic of blogging, although this is slightly aside from where it's based in research, is, by the way, with blogging you can give the feedback as they're doing it. So they can use the information you give them to improve their work rather than just as a comment that comes later. Mm-hmm. And they can go in and re-edit it. So instead of having to rewrite something to redraft it, they simply just fix it. And that's how our lives work, I think. So that's nice, all right. But that's all. The important part is that came from research, but I amplified that research. I didn't just take it as I now have an intervention where it's important that I mark every student's work at a higher frequency because I know that will make them do better. It was about using the information creatively and in ways that I personally find interesting. This would be, some teachers would quit rather than having to do that, and that needs to be respected. This was just my way of amplifying the research. So there's one example.
Can I ask about as well,
Great.
being very virtual? Because I think I think my line manager would like, if I said it's all on the internet, they'd just die.
Yeah.
If it wasn't like in a book.
Yeah.
Traditional.
I had one.
Everything was.
Great point. And I think this is where I talk about being brave actually, because one Ofsted inspector said my lessons are outstanding, and then in a subsequent inspection by a different Ofsted inspector, they said that I require improvement in a very similar setting. And the one that said I required improvement said the students weren't making progress because he couldn't see their work. Does that make sense? And so it was a risk, and in one case I failed in my job to hold the school's standards high because I couldn't provide the material in a form that was suitable for the people who were inspecting. I have to remember who my customer is, but it is an absolutely meaningful criticism or concern.
Did you get any support when they turned around and said, did anyone come up to you and go, we still think?
Yes.
Or was it very much?
Yes, they did, and you need that. We need to do that for each other, don't we? But good point. Yeah. And I think we're going to find that, especially in the current climate, if we decide to do something that's a little risky, we're going to find that we have to be brave, and we have to support each other. But the research basis is where it helps, isn't it? Because I could talk about why I'm doing this, not just on the basis of me being an internet guy, but because there was something underpinning it that most people trusted. And I think the research can be used by us as teachers as that, can't it? It can be used as a, what's the finishing time? Sorry, I don't want to, I just want to, does anyone know? Okay, we'll work perfectly to time, okay. The research can also be used in those tough times to help us to reassure us that what we're doing isn't just fantasy work. It's actually something that's exploring trying to have a better impact, trying to improve our impact on the students. Okay, next thing, unless anyone wants to. Okay. The next one is working with researchers on looking at the work that we do in classrooms and being informed by researchers' ideas and working in ways that researchers might suggest could work, or even just being open to working differently so that a researcher could explore it. So being led by the researchers is very beneficial to me as a practitioner in terms of my thinking. So having an educational researcher at my side is working with me on a project where I run the teaching and learning, and they observe the project and assess and evaluate the project it's like having a critical friend at your side all the time. And so that's something I need to talk about with Michelle. I'll introduce what we do. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah.
And then Michelle can talk about it from the dimension from the researcher's point of view. So this particular one is a club. So it's an after-school activity. It's run by the French Film Archive, the Cinémathèque Française, and it's been running for quite some time. It's a schools project, and it involves embedding the students learning about film in serious French film theory, and about asking them to explore film theory and then to produce film based on their appreciation of that theory. So it's very sophisticated in terms of its intellectual aims. Its intellectual goals are great. The kids view film that are exploring a certain aspect of film, which may be the way film is framed, or it may be about what's real or what's imaginary in film, or each year there's a different kind of line of inquiry for the film project. And then the students do film activities to try and explore the possibilities and the dimensions of that area, and then they make a final film which they take to Paris and present to each other, the other filmmakers from around Europe, and defend, because essentially they're challenged on how well they've effectively fulfilled the brief and what their thinking was about the choices they made in filmmaking. So it's a very much a student project-centered thing, but in a very academic style. Now, you can just do stuff like that, film club. But what we did is try to learn about what it can teach us about how to be more effective with our students in the classroom. What can we learn about pedagogy from this project? Because there were magnificent outcomes coming from it. But it's so interesting and there are so many dimensions to it, I needed help weeding through to find out what it all was about it. That was the replicable bit, or the bit that was the most necessary component. And so, do you want to?
Sure, yeah. Gosh, how do you follow Chris's fluid passion and enthusiasm?
You followed by yourself and bringing your
Anyway, just to give you a bit of background, I'm a researcher. I'm also a teacher. I've still got a foot in a primary state school where I work one day a week, doing creative media projects. And I admit I do not have 30 children in front of me every day, all day. I run an after-school club and I do the website. I used to be a web designer. So I've got kind of pedagogic kind of background, and I used to teach English as a foreign language as well. So pedagogy, kind of technical stuff, creative stuff, it all kind of melded into a master's that I did a few years ago, and I met Chris through that on this project. And I've been involved with this project since then. But just a bit about kind of think, are there any researchers here? No. Okay. For example, when I first sat down, I'm doing a PhD at the moment as well. When I first sat down with my supervisor, he said, "Well, right, Michelle," I was like dead nervous, thinking he's going to ask me lots of penetrating questions, and he just said, "What's your hunch?" And this kind of stayed with me, and it always stays with me. I think we've got to just recognise what our individual hunch is. And I said, almost kind of knee-jerk, I just said that there should be more digital media production going on in primary schools. And I kind of didn't know where even that came from. You know, it's just, that's what should be happening. And I still believe that. And part of my research is connected with the idea of expanding the notion of literacy. So that it's not all about reading and writing anymore. It is about reading and writing, but it is also too about the audiovisual and about this the media landscape in which we're all, we're inhabiting at the moment. What was I going to say? So this supervisor, he also made me establish what my worldview is, and I think it's something that we could all do with doing. And my worldview is based on social constructionism or social constructivism. I think there's a difference there, but I haven't quite worked out what it is yet. In other words, all these kind of institutions that surround us, the media constructs that surround us, they're all made by humans and they can all be changed. And this is something that I want primary school kids to know, that they can get involved with, that they can participate socially. And I believe that's what literacy is all about, social participation. So the other thing that the PhD is kind of teaching me, and also the Masters, is that we have to be, as a researcher, extremely self-reflexive. We're going to be honest about our kind of social embeddedness, that we all have opinions, that your hunch comes from somewhere, it comes from your social class, gender, race, how you live, and as long as you can be kind of transparent about all that, that's the best that we can hope. So I will get to the point, this all will come in. Getting back to the social constructivism, it's a paradigm which is very kind of inclusive. It involves a kind of worldview that is accepting of multiplicity. Right? What I was hearing this morning, I've got a bit of an issue with quite a lot of what I've been hearing, because to me it's kind of a narrowing down. It's what works, what works, and I'm all about let's have multiplicity, let's have plural kind of thinking, let's get it all in there, let's be interested in everything, you know, let's be interested in qualitative, quantitative. I'm a qualitative researcher. So, you know, this polarisation is a dangerous thing, and polarisation is kind of interesting, but let's not get too hung up on it. I think kind of multiple interpretations, which is getting on for what this is all about, I think it bears richer fruit, basically, and it inculcates kind of flatter notions. Let's try and deal with these hierarchies, these flatter frameworks, and it's inclusive, it's democratic, and I think if we think in these ways, it means that the research that is done will be more likely to be acted on, more likely to be heard, more likely to be replicated by the likes of you. And it's just more interesting. I'm also, this is a side issue, but I'm interested in arts-inflected kind of research dissemination. So I'm interested in narrative methodologies, not figures. I'm not saying figures are bad, it's just not my thing. So I will be telling stories in my research dissemination. I will be having the kids make films about the stuff that I'm interested in, hopefully they will be interested in, to just engage a more media literate audience these days. What works? I mean, what works? Got an issue with that. I think it should be more what's relevant to the child that you're teaching. There's not been an awful lot of chat today about learning and student-centred pedagogy. So the Cinémathèque Française, what's different here? As Chris was saying, this is a project that's been going on for 18 years. This is how serious the French are about their genre. 18 years, and it's incredibly serious. And the head honcho, Alain Bergala, chooses, as Chris was saying, a kind of theme for the year which is rooted in film language. It's not issue-driven. It's not let's all make a film about bullying. Please can we make that pro-empathy week and not anti-bullying week? I always say that whenever I've got a group of teachers. Yeah, so the themes are, it could be light, and they say light for 2 terms, or it could be camera movement. So, or it could be point of view, or mise en scène. This year, and we're about to get training on it in a couple of weeks in Paris, is about le plan séquence, in other words, the long take. It's all in French, unapologetically all in French as well. So, you know, why are we standing here making you listen to a very kind of, you know, elitist, very far away kind of film program in Paris? Well, it's because what it engenders is the great conditions for the learning process. So all these kids are given very specific film exercises to do. They all do the same exercises. This is pan-European. We've got several hundred kids, including Brazil, Cuba and Guadeloupe actually this year, from 8 to 18, all studying the same thing. You know, all the films are screened in June, and the kids come over, and it's all very culturally rich. But what's interesting is that they're all given kind of set constraints, and then they can interpret around that. And these films are then put on the internet, and we can all see what everyone's come up with. So I use this as a case study in my master's. I'm now using it as a case study in the PhD. And what's rich about this is the partnerships that's generated, partnerships that are strong, flat. I keep coming back to this word. I don't know if anyone's heard the word rhizomic. It's how bamboos grow, you know, outwards like this with nodules. It's that idea of not a network. I take issue with the word network. It's about mesh. It's about this mess and mesh. Enough of that. So yeah, what else was I going to say? So I think what can be kind of disinterred from the kind of frameworks that in which this programme operates is that idea of plurality of interpretations, which is again a kind of very rich research dimension. It's about non-linear and discursive formations. Flatter organisational structures, not top-down. I want to see, you know, this grassroots thing, and I want to see. It would be great to see teachers going out on a limb and contacting that person.